Let's dig into all of this, particularly the latest Putin threats. We got our chief White House correspondent sitting here with me, Kristen Welker. We got our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, in Ukraine. We've also have Michael McFaul, the former U.S. ambassador to Russia and NBC News international analyst. And Evelyn Farkas is here. She's the executive director at the McCain Institute. More importantly, she served in the Defense Department. She was a former assistant secretary of defense for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. So first, let's talk about how much today changed, Kristen, based on what happened earlier this morning. The president was already going to address Putin in the war. It was going to be a big part of the speech. But then Putin seemed to announce his own recalibration, which we were all expecting. How much did the White House use this speech to react directly to that?
Well, they did react directly to it. They say they were prepared for this type of escalation, Chuck, but there's no doubt that the president did have to review and even rewrite at least a line of his speech to directly respond to what we heard from Vladimir Putin, which was an escalation. This mobilization of more than 300,000 troops, but the fact that he threatened to use nuclear weapons just days, to put this into context, after President Biden in an interview said there would be severe consequences if he were to use nuclear weapons. Now, the president has never said what those consequences will be, and of course has said that he's not going to send U.S. troops into Ukraine, and so big question mark looms over that. But this was a clear escalation, or an attempt at an escalation by Vladimir Putin, and I think it really underscores the fact that this is a president who feels as though his back is against the wall. Of course, Ukraine has had these gains, and so he is feeling defeated in some areas. And so he's really trying to recalibrate, Vladimir Putin is. And I think that it's worth noting this is a leader who is unpredictable, and that's one of the things that concerns U.S. officials most, Chuck. In a perverse way, does the White House, I mean, the timing of this oddly is really good for this White House as they try to meet with various delegations here at the UN and get continued support for this war. Putin's saber-rattling today almost feels like an advertisement for that. It proves this point, right? I mean, his whole goal is to rally support for Ukraine. Now this war entering into its seventh month, and you have the U.S. It's already given more than $15 billion in military aid. The question becomes, when you're talking about some of these allies around the world, in Europe in particular, how does the president continue to keep them incentivized, to keep giving more military and economic and humanitarian aid against the backdrop of everything that you just laid out, Chuck, which is this impending financial crisis that they are bracing for the possibility of it worsening in Europe, potentially leading to a global recession, and of course the energy crisis as well. And so that's where the real challenge lies.
I have to say, Germany seemed very bullish on being able to handle this. Chancellor Scholz really feels like he's going to handle this, and he seems to be a bit more committed.
And the UK too.
Yeah.
But those are two of a number of allies.
Pledges and reality can sometimes run into each other. All right, Richard Engel in Ukraine. What's been the response, and what do they want the Western alliance response? Again, as I say, we're in the middle of this gathering at the UN. Normally you're here. It's one of the few times we get to see you here in New York. You're not, because we're in the middle of this war. I know Zelensky's going to be speaking, and he's going to be making his pitch. What do they want in response to this saber-rattling?
They want the West, they want the United States not to lose their nerve. They want to keep going. They believe that they have the upper hand right now, that the Russian military is, at least on a tactical level, collapsing out here in the east, that the main defensive line in northeastern Ukraine, not far from where I am in Kharkiv, has effectively collapsed. And they don't want the United States, Germany, other countries to hear this nuclear saber rattling and suddenly get cold feet about the entire enterprise. They believe that right now the Russians are on the ropes. The Russians don't have enough men to keep the ranks moving, and that's been one of the big problems. That's why Putin has had to order this general or partial mobilization, because a lot of the units, they have many units, but they don't have enough manpower in the units. And in some of the battles here over the last couple of weeks, according to Ukrainian officials, the Russians, which have a larger military than the Ukrainians do, were outnumbered 8-1. And it's one of the reasons we've seen Russian security companies going to prisons and offering pardons to convicted criminals in exchange for combat tours. The Ukrainians feel that at this time, because it's going to take some time for the Russians to gather these 300,000 men and get them into service and get them some basic training, get them onto the battlefield, that they have an opportunity right now. And while this partial mobilization has been called, we're already getting a sense of how the Russian people are feeling about it, because many of them are mobilizing and are mobilizing towards the exits of the country. Earlier today, there were reports that flights out of Moscow to all visa-free countries to which Russians can travel without a visa, were all booked or were only available for exorbitant prices. Other reports that those flights were later restricted, of long lines of cars heading toward the Finnish border, which has an open visa policy. So there is a feeling in this country that by expanding this war and exposing the general public of Russia more to it, this could work in Ukraine's favor and against Putin in the short to medium term.
Richard, what's the Ukrainian government's plan to handle these sham referenda that obviously are designed to give Putin this rationale that somehow Russia's territorial integrity is being threatened?
Well, that's the main argument, and I think it's important to follow Vladimir Putin's rationale right now. So starting on Friday and then continuing into next week, there's supposed to be these 4 different referenda in 4 regions in Ukraine, Ukrainian territory, regions that are either partially or completely controlled by Russian forces. And it is widely expected that these elections, these referenda, yes-no vote, will decide to see those areas join up with Russia. And Vladimir Putin has already made it clear in his comments that he wants this process to go forward and that he wants these areas to become part of Russia. If you're reading between the lines a little bit, but that was the general framework. The next step would be, so the referenda take place, Vladimir Putin accepts them, they want to be part of Russia forever, and he says okay. And that was the context in which he was describing potential use of nuclear weapons, saying if the territorial integrity of Russia, meaning the future Russia, the pieces of Russia that are about to become incorporated to Russia are threatened, then he could draw out his nuclear weapons. So there are concerns here that is setting the stage to create a nuclear crisis. Annex these territories, make them part of the country, territories that are still contested, still in a battle zone, and then roll out nuclear weapons in order to cause a kind of a Cuban Missile Crisis Part 2.
Well, there's a scenario. Richard Engel in Kharkiv for us. Richard, I know you've got a bunch of other reporting to do, and it's late. I'll let you go. Appreciate that. So it's with that scenario that Richard just painted, Mike McFall, that I want to ask you about this. Obviously, Putin is backed into a corner. He's been in a corner for 7 months. This is step one of his reaction here. He's clearly desperate to strengthen himself at a negotiating table. But how long does he have?
Great question, Chuck. I don't have a great answer. I think this speech was a speech of defeat, right? He wouldn't be given this speech if he's winning on the battlefield. And he's changed the goalposts in 2 ways. One, he now talks about liberating Donbass. He throws in 2 other regions, as you were just talking with Richard. He's a little confused about that. Sometimes it's the greater Novorossiya that he talks about. But he's very explicit. He's not taking over all of Ukraine. He wants to just liberate Donbass. And then 2, he has to mobilize 300,000 people to do that. Those are 2 very different things than he said 7 months ago. I think what the Ukrainian government is worried about, and I am worried about too, frankly, is that if somehow he does that, and then he says, okay, now let's sue for peace. You know, it's like the game of musical chairs. I'm sitting on these four new regions. Let's now sue for peace. And don't forget, with his saber rattling about his nuclear weapons to the West, if you don't, that's what I'm going to do. And then I think leaders in Kiev are worried that the West will say, well, peace is better than nuclear war. So that, I think, is the next thing that we should be watching for in the coming weeks and months.
Evelyn, how do we prepare for that? Chancellor, I asked basically a version of that question to Chancellor Scholz about, what's negotiable of Ukraine's territory. And he said it's up to Ukraine. I brought up Crimea, and he's like, it's up to Ukraine. That's the second world leader that is saying that. Is that what the alliance is going? Will they all stick together on that front?
Well, I mean, the best I can say is hopefully, Chuck. But I do think it's really important to pause and just kind of restate what both you and Mike McFaul just said. I mean, what President Putin is trying to do is start kind of a new negotiation on his terms. His declaration that he's going to hold these referenda and essentially annex these portions of Ukraine, these new portions of Ukraine. His declaration that he's going to do this call up of reservists. These are just statements. They're political statements. We don't even know if he has enough reservists, how fast he can train them. Does he have enough equipment for them? So I don't even know whether it's really militarily credible or how much teeth it has in the short term. In the short term, it's really aimed at his nationalist base, making sure that they know he's with them. It's aimed at the people living in those separatist areas. But I think we need to understand that this nuclear saber rattling, it gets Putin nowhere. I mean, if you draw it to its logical conclusion and the Ukrainians attack Donbass, or we help them attack Donbass, and they detonate a nuclear device, I mean, the world has changed. And President Biden said it himself, and I've said it in other fora, basically the international community will not stand to have a leader after the Second World War for the first time use a nuclear weapon, detonate a nuclear weapon in anger. That will change the equation. We will then probably have to take direct action. It doesn't mean boots on the ground, but we'll have to do something to get that person or that regime that authorized such a decision out of the Kremlin, out of power. So it's a game changer. And he has to see beyond that, right?
It's pretty clear right now that Russians troops in Ukraine are very vulnerable. Is there how important of a moment is this? And do you sense that the Western Alliance and NATO realizes, hey, boy, now is the time to give Ukraine everything it needs, because clearly the Russians are vulnerable in this moment, more so than they might be if and when those 300,000 troops get drawn into this?
Yeah, I mean, you asked me the right question, because I'm constantly nervous, having kind of grown up professionally in this defense world where you're always thinking of worst case scenario. Yesterday, I met with some Lithuanian defense officials, and they're worried that we're not providing enough fast enough, and also new weapons that they need now that things are changing. So I do think that there's a fear, and it's very hard to tell. Even they conceded we might be providing enough. The Ukrainians aren't telling us everything. But they think resupply is also an issue. The tempo that they've been using these weapons. We really do, though, need to take advantage of the time we have now. They also said they thought that we could fight, or the Ukrainians could fight into the winter, potentially. They're more worried about a rainy season. So, the equation is fast action now while the Russians are weak. That's what we have to press with.
Mike, I'm curious to watch Russians flee the country, right? Trying to get out of military service, trying to get out of this. I mean, look, I know it's very hard to understand what's going on in the Kremlin, but this has to be, Putin he looks as weak as ever, and this feels like he's as vulnerable as ever, but I know that doesn't mean he's vulnerable.
Well, it's always hard to know when dictators are vulnerable, right? A professor at Harvard, when Nikita Khrushchev was thrown out in 1964, he was asked by somebody like you, probably, Chuck. He said, well, why didn't you predict that, Professor Ulam? And he said, how could I predict it when Khrushchev himself didn't know it? So just to remind ourselves, we're bad at understanding those things. Yeah. Having said that, yes, tickets to Istanbul are $1,200 today. For the first time in months, you had hundreds, maybe thousands of people out on the streets in Moscow protesting against the war. If they're doing that, that means that orders of magnitude of others have the same preferences. Nobody wants to be called up in a partial mobilization. And this was a thing that Putin wanted to avoid. The fact that he had to do it means that he's desperate, that he wants to change the equation on the battlefield. And I just completely agree with what Evelyn said. I just think this is a moment for the Ukrainians. They've known it for a long time, by the way. These counteroffensive have been planned for a long time. They wanted it right before the UN General Assembly so that they could refuel and re-spark support from the West. They now are, if you look at their soldiers, they all have, first Kherson, then Crimea, all those kind of signs. They want to march now because they don't want to freeze into that moment where if Putin signals negotiation, he might have some supporters in the West. I don't think President Biden, but maybe some other leaders might say, hey, it's time to call it quits.
Kristen, does the White House appreciate the urgency of this moment?
They absolutely do. And I think it speaks to the fact that they know that there is a morale issue that Putin is dealing with right now. And so now is the time, they believe, to give President Zelensky what he's asking for. And I expect we're going to hear him lay that out when he speaks a little bit later on this hour. And they also go to a point that Evelyn was making, which is the timing of this. They just don't know what type of a timeline they are dealing with. And so they see this moment as critical, and they feel the urgency to get Zelensky what he needs. But again, he continues to say he needs more.
He does, and you can't help. You feel like there's a tiny crack sometimes in the Western Alliance that gets people nervous. Anyway, Kristen Welker, Ambassador McFaul, Mike, good to see you. Evelyn Farkas, good to see you as well. And, of course, Richard Engel in Kharkiv for us.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.